Everybody, welcome. This is Lab 5. Lab 5 is going to be covering threads and mostly thread synchronization. A main thing that's being asked of you from this lab is to translate the kind of step-by-step instructions that are given to you into code. Now, unlike previous labs, there's not a lot of code that's actually given to you here. There's a couple lines of code here and there, like it tells you maybe what functions to use and that kind of thing, but most of the code is going to be up to you to generate. One major task of this lab is to fill out the accompanying spreadsheet for observations. Now, throughout the PDF, it says stop and record what happens. There's a few of those. You're given a Word document with a couple boxes in it to note your observations. Most of this lab is going to be writing the code step by step as the PDF instructs and noting those observations. Like I mentioned, this lab is going over threads and thread synchronization. So a lot of those kind of observations are going to be related to the synchronization of those threads. So like the order of things being printed and how many things are being printed, that kind of thing. So I'll start us off though. First thing it says, create two classes. One will contain your static method and the other is magic thread. It also talks about how magic thread is extending the normal thread class, and it mentions what extending is there. But let's start that up. So we'll create a new Java project. I'll name it Lab 5. As always, new class. Here I'm going to say this is my magic thread class. Now, what we mean by extends is that the thread class that already exists in the Java language is going to be our base class. So it's almost like we're going to be taking all of the methods that are already in the thread class, and we're going to be adding them to our class. But without explicitly writing every single method and every single attribute, I can just say extends thread. It also mentions that it wants you to make sure to include that. So this is java.lang.thread. So now magic thread is basically a copy of the thread object. It's called something different, but because we haven't added anything to it, it is almost an exact copy. What the lab wants you to do, and this is where all your code is, or most of your code is going to go, is we're going to add this run method. So run is something that can be overridden from the base thread class. So when I say void run, when I make this run method, what does it want from me? Sure. When I make this run method, it's kind of covering up the run method that's in the normal thread, and it's almost like we're replacing it from the original thread. So the thread is the original thread class is still aware that this run exists, that it's still aware that it has a run method. But if the thread class or the internals of the thread class have any methods that call the run method, it will call this one instead of the default one that already exists in thread. Okay, so once we've got that squared away, we also want to make our app class as usual. Let's make a class, and this is going to be thread app. And this is going to include our main method. So here it wants you to make two instances of the magic thread. So make sure you make two instances, and I'll call them M1. There we go. And I'll take M2 as well. So these are my two instances. If I want them to run, I can say m1.start, and similarly, I can do m2.start. Now, remember, this .start method does not exist in our magic thread. It exists in the base thread. So when I call .start, it's going to run, or the thread's base, the base thread's start method has a call to run, but because I've defined my own run here, this is the run that's going to be ran when I run start. Yes. All right, so This is setting up the threads. It asks you to put some print statements, and again, this is kind of your first observation after this point. So up until now has been almost up until step 3. So you can see that this is going to go pretty quick. Later on, it mentions you need to add a constructor for Magic Thread. So instead of leaving the default constructor with no arguments like I have here, I would want to add another constructor right here, and I can take any arguments. So I think it wants you to take in a name and something else. I forget what it else also wants. I think it's a list of statements, but I'll leave that for you guys to figure out how to put that in there. It also mentions that it wants, and now we see that the constructor is red because it wants an argument in the constructor. It also wants you to make some global variables throughout this. So for example, it wants you to pass that string of phrases into these constructors. Where you're actually going to define these phrases, we can see they're given to us at the bottom here. Where we're actually going to define these phrases is up here. So still in our thread app, if I can just copy paste this. So we see I can just copy paste that right in, but I'm going to go ahead and make that static so that this is available to this static method right here. So main is static. Any variables that I access from here also need to be static. Otherwise, they require an instance, and I'm not going to make an instance of the thread app. It's just going to be static. So once I've made phrases, this is what I can pass into these magic threads. Anyway, like I mentioned, most of this is an English walkthrough, so not a lot of code given to you, but it should still be fairly straightforward to follow along. Everything's included. And like I said, this gets us, what I've done here gets us pretty far through this PDF already. Most of the lab assignment is based around these observations that you're making. Threads can be a tricky thing, so it's important, or it's kind of nice to get these a little practice with the synchronization. All right, that's it. Good luck with it.